Welcome to Burning Platforms, our fortnightly look at the intersection of technology and politics, brought to you by Capita's Centre of the Public Square. I'm Peter Lewis. This week we look at how the upcoming presidential elections could shape and be shaped by Web3 with Mark Monfort from the Aus De-Fi Association. But first, our regular wrap of the latest news with panellists Health Engine CEO Dan Stinton and digital rights advocate Kate Bauer. So joining me tonight in our virtual attic is the great Dan Stinton, Health Engine CEO, joining us from Perth. Go, Dan.
Hey, Peter.
And digital rights advocate Kate Bauer, who's subbing in for Lizzie while she's somewhere on holidays on the subcontinent. So hi, Kate, and thanks for being part of it tonight.
Hi, Pete.
Also, our special guest from Australian De-Fi Association, Mark Monfort. We're going to do our deep dive into the political worldview of Web3. I'm not sure if we call it a sector or a movement, Mark, but really interested in talking to you in the context of what some are calling the upcoming tech bro presidential election. So welcome along as well.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Yeah, I met Mark when we were planning Audrey Tang's visit earlier this year, and it really struck me that the universes of Digital Rights Watch and Web3 rarely intersect. So I've been planning this conversation for a while, and it's just great to have you tonight as part of the discussion. Look forward to getting to know you and your world better as we go. But before we get there, let's go to our hot takes. So first up, Kate, there was this incredibly distressing case about an action launched against an AI chatbot by the family of a young man, I think in the US, who suicided. It appears while in conversation with the machine. What do we know about the case, and how might it mark a new front line of algorithmic accountability?
Yeah, it's a pretty concerning story, and I think probably potentially sadly might not be the first time we hear of these sorts of things occurring as we see chatbots becoming kind of more common. But this particular case involved a teenage boy who seemed by all accounts just like a regular kid. God, it was a little bit, lonely, logged on to the program in question is called Character AI. And it's one of these chatbot services that you can kind of design someone to talk to. They say they've got some kind of content moderation around it, some limits, some kind of like no-go zones. So this case, I think, is probably testing how effective those sorts of limits are and how effective this kind of, I guess, self-regulation or self-correction is of this type of product. I mean, it's pretty interesting in the sense that this character was based on, this is an interesting bit, a Game of Thrones character who I think is pronounced Daenerys. I'm not a Game of Thrones watcher. I don't know if I'm outing myself into the audience as a non-Game of Thrones watcher, but fantasy is not my thing. And by kind of all accounts, kind of started off pretty neutral and was having a good old chat, was quite helpful in talking through some personal problems, dealing a little bit with that kind of loneliness and isolation. But somewhere along the lines, things got pretty dark. And this young boy talked about thoughts of suicide with a chatbot who sometimes tried to talk him out of it, but in this particular instance seems to have encouraged him to take that action, and then tragically was found by his family. So essentially the case that the family, having then seen from the police all of the contents of this, the chat, has now decided to take action against the company and are trying to make them accountable. So it raises some like super interesting questions. One of the things that I think is interesting about this company is that they kind of claim to say we're going to like solve the loneliness epidemic. Like this is actually a really helpful service and there are all these lonely people out there in the world. And wouldn't it be great if they had someone friendly and comforting to talk to, which I think kind of sounds appealing, but I think, and Dan will probably have an opinion on this being more connected to the health and medical space. But in the real world, we have rules and regulations about who people can talk to about things like suicide and about things like self-harm and loneliness. And we have registration for therapists and for psychologists, and they need to be trained professionals, and we have escalation for if things start going dark and people need help. So none of those things were present in an AI. So it's kind of like we've got these two different sets of rules for what we're allowing to be possible in the digital space versus what we would permit if that was a real person that they were talking to. So I think it's got some like pretty interesting issues around it. I think my hot take on it is that the government is looking at banning young people from social media, but this is not social media, right? So I think it kind of means that the government's got the wrong end of the stick if they're looking just to ban people from a simple platform.
Connecting with real people.
Yeah. Online, if they don't kind of have a broader understanding of what the risks are for young people online, and that perhaps banning isn't the best framing of it. And they're 10 years behind with even looking at social media being the problem, because we're seeing these sorts of online platforms and chatbots, come up. Will they be held accountable? I don't know. I mean, I had a little I just walked my way through the new voluntary AI safety standard and tried to apply it to this case, as you do. Well, some of us do. And I'm not even entirely convinced. I'm not sure that if the company had followed such a standard, which is around guardrails for risk management, essentially, that might even have prevented harm in this case. So I think some really interesting questions about what are we actually trying to stop here in terms of these harms, and what's the best way to go about it, and who should be accountable, and how are we going to hold them accountable?
Yeah, Dan, we've made a few jokes about personal companions over the last couple of years, and sort of the idea that even a machine would, with or without Scarlett Johansson's voice, would purport to know you. This seems to be taking it down to another step altogether, where it's trying to. I don't think. I read the words, and I think it was partly interpretation of what it said. I think it was something like "come home to me" or something like this. It could be used in many ways, but clearly very distressing for the family. So what did you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's tragic, isn't it? It's and I think you're right, Kate. I think this is the first of many of these things that we're going to see. I mean, as I was reading about this case, circumstance, whatever you want to call it, I think drew parallels, as you just did, really to social media in a way. And the promise of social media in the beginning, and certainly what Zuckerberg and a lot of others were saying, was this was going to connect the world, and more connections can ultimately only lead to good things and whatever else. But instead what we saw is sort of the rise of misinformation and disinformation. If you squint, there's sort of some parallels there too. I mean, disinformation, we've talked a lot on this show about how AI can be used to turbocharge disinformation and distribute that around the world. This is almost a form of misinformation in a way. It's a circumstance where the AI and the algorithm has kind of missed the subtle meaning of what the interaction was with this poor kid, and therefore led it down to a really dark path. And I don't know if you can put the genie back in the bottle. That's the concern that I've got with this. Is it just feels like this is, whether the company is going to be held accountable, or just give the computer says no defense and probably get away with it seems likely to me. But I think I draw a slightly different conclusion to you, in that I think as a minimum, because I can't think of what else to do, but I think as a minimum, we need to put age restrictions on these things. I mean, I'm in favour of the age restriction on social media. I think I'm the only one on the Burning Platforms panel that is. So as usual, I'm surrounded. But I think this is another pretty good example of why that's needed. I mean, at the very least, until these companies can demonstrate that their technology is going to do no harm, I can't understand how you would let young people be the guinea pigs and allow these sorts of things to happen. And I think it's going to keep happening. So that's all I can come up with, to be honest, as a way to mitigate the risk, but it's not a very fulsome one.
What do you see when you look at this, Mark?
It's really interesting. We work in the AI space as well. So even though one of the hats I wear is running the events as part of that emerging tech side with blockchain,
the company that I work for commercially, called Not Centralized, we do a lot of work in AI and blockchain. We came from blockchain first, and funnily enough, it's actually a good thing that it's come that way, because when you look at these harms that potentially happen, there are ways that you can see how blockchain actually is more of a protection, rather than just like the parts of blockchain and crypto that have just been about investments. So first and foremost, I think that the standards that are being looked at are a good thing. It's definitely not going to stop the harms like this from happening. But what you do hope for, until at least the government puts out that these are mandatory rules, they did recently just say that we've got a consultation on what we are proposing as mandatory rules, especially when it comes to high risk, like if a doctor's using AI or a lawyer or a financial advisor. But until then, we have to abide by, well, we have to go with what they've got left, which is like the voluntary standards. And I just hope that at least in the short term, it means that if AI is being pushed by companies to their employees, to their clients, etc., that the ones that are chosen are companies that are actually following those standards, such as saying when it's AI that's actually the voice on the other side of the phone, because it's getting eerily realistic, right? It's not just these just character AI, which is avatars and whatnot, but like much more realistic ones where you don't know that you're not actually speaking to a person. And you see some of these startup companies saying, well, what their clients saying, well, I don't want that. I want to use your service without, those kind of like admissions and stuff. And I know companies that are saying, no, you have to have that. Like, what's your point? Are you trying to trick people? Unfortunately, the weakness in this is that there's a lot of promise with the tech, but the weakness, unfortunately, is the humans in the loop, really. Like, as much as we want humans to be there to check the AI, the weakness being that we will twist and use the AI kind of tools to our advantage for good or for bad, and self-harm in this case, unfortunately. I do think that one thing to really think about with this is, unlike in the past where we've had code and you had to be a hacker to break into things, now you've got something where you can code by language. And what that also means is that you can talk to these things and use social hacking. The things that you would do to, for example, convince someone at a store to give you information you're not supposed to have about that store, or what people were doing with these guardrails that inside the AI chatbots, they would do things like they can't give you chemical ingredients for making chemical weapons. But if you told it that your grandmother used to be a chemical engineer and she would read you bedtime stories and it would remind you of her, if it did that, in the past it was doing, and giving away that kind of information. So this is a new kind of ball game. And it's really interesting tech. I see a lot of the positives, but we can't ignore this kind of stuff as well. So we have to find a way to come together to solve this.
That's really interesting, because you guys work on this sort of front line of hardcore innovation, but you're saying you actually need the guardrails to guide the way innovation occurs.
I think so, especially, and it's not a blanket statement. It's certainly more for where there's high risk scenarios. I would actually classify something like this where it's people of a, where the mind is still kind of forming and they're going through those teenage years, as we can all remember to when we were younger and we were going through that. And like,
we only wrote teen angst poetry though. That was okay.
Yes, exactly. Angst and all that kind of stuff. We'd write music, we'd go out to concerts and we'd rebel. And now people have these tools in front of them where it could potentially be damaging like this. I do wonder if this would not have still happened, unfortunately for this person, by other means. But at the same time, I see that as high risk. I also see, like I said, finance, healthcare, clinical side of healthcare. There's operations, they're using it for marketing, they're using it to summarize emails. That's fine. But when it's clinical information, I do think it's dangerous to just put AI in the hands of a patient without a middleman being a qualified professional involved. And there are things that are being worked on by us and by others that are trying to do things to showcase that if AI is being used in a process, that a human professional has seen it, has clicked a button to do like a digital attestation or signature, and then it's recorded to something where it can be made transparent that, yes, look at us, we're being compliant. And the voluntary AI standards, they follow, well, they say a lot of these things: human in the loop, keep compliance records, mitigate against like high risk kind of like situations. So being at that forefront and seeing what is happening, because we're not the only developers, there's a lot of great innovation here and overseas, but it is interesting seeing that more people are becoming cognizant of the need to be safer, because customers want this kind of stuff. They don't want just AI that, well, not all,
kills
some
you.
people will,
Yeah.
but they don't want AI that's just going crazy out there.
Yeah. Look, I might use that as, I'm not sure if this is a segue, but it seems to be a natural, there's a segue, sorry, a natural flower. I was interested to read David Swan's very positive profile piece around an Australian startup called In Truth in the 9 papers this week. So one of the talking points in the story was the founder, Nicole Gibson, was the youngest ever Commonwealth Mental Health Commissioner. In Truth has raised nearly $10 million and is preparing for a public launch next year. Quoting David here, it uses wearable technology, in Gibson's case, a wrist-worn device, a little bit like a Fitbit, to track a user's emotions in real time. It then gives advice on what to do about them. And then David quotes Gibson, "We basically pull the raw data from the wearables and we have built a machine learning model that translates that data into emotions that are fed back to the user. We will have the most accurate emotion detector in the world, collecting millions of people's emotional data. It's going to have a huge upside." The entrepreneur cites a raft of potential use cases. A police force supervisor or fire department could see their team's emotional data and predict issues such as PTSD. An office manager might use it to measure a team's performance and energy. A person might fall out with a close friend and use In Truth to trace when and why it all went wrong. In fact, what could go wrong here, guys? Personally, I'm really wary of tools purporting to replicate humanness, because I think that this ends up misunderstanding what machine learning is about. I think we can identify patterns based on past actions, but as our friend Sally Cripps at UTS's Human Technology Institute's been telling me, it can't come up with the solutions because it lacks the individual context of the moment. All it can do is predict the pattern. So I don't know. What do you think, Kate? How do we stop a rinse and repeat of our first story? Or is this just the digital version of the old biorhythms in the Daily Telegraph?
I mean, look, I think this is coming from a good place, but just no. Just stop it. Just no. It's fundamentally a terrible idea. I have a huge amount of doubt whether or not emotion, whatever they're calling it, emotion, what they think it's the world's best emotion recognizer or something. I think that sounds like junk science to me, but I am no scientist. My PhD is in gender studies after all. But this just has some massive assumptions built in, right? And it essentially is trying to make a case for workplace surveillance and other types of surveillance. Like if you have a falling out with a friend, go and talk to them. You don't need some wearable to find out what went wrong and what emotions you were feeling. I mean, this is madness. And the fact that they even are purporting that there's a link between workplace performance and emotions, I think is completely without evidence. I think it seems, again, I'm going to admit that I'm not a fan of commercial radio either, but I did hear that story this week.
Do you like anything, Kate?
Yeah, just really, really niche books about AI. I'm not a big mainstream kind of gal. But that story about Jackie O, the radio announcer this week, who admitted to having a drug and alcohol problem for years, she was the most successful person on radio for years while harboring this like incredibly painful, difficult, emotional secret. Like if she had this wearable tracker on, it would have just been going off every day telling her bosses that she was having a hard time. But she was a very high performer at work. So I don't think there's an obvious necessary. I mean, I think we need to care about health and well-being at work. Like, don't get me wrong. But I think even just the idea that you can track people's emotion and then get meaningful actions on the basis of it is like A, junk science. And then B, where's the evidence that this is actually a useful contribution to the world. But I do feel like, given the backgrounds of the founder, it probably is coming from a good and genuine place. But it just goes back to, like, where's the evidence? Like, we've just completely forgotten that we can find stuff out, right? Like, that you can actually test these things beyond testing the tech, actually think about what's the use case here.
Is there a positive use case either of you guys can see, Dan or Mark?
Mate, look, where do you start with this? Similar to you, Kate, I want to acknowledge this up front. I mean, Gibson seems like an amazing woman who's done some incredible work up to now, and I'm certain that her intentions here are good and her heart's in the right place. And she's raised a bunch of money for this startup, so she's obviously got a pretty compelling story to tell to at least a bunch of venture capitalists, I'm assuming. The issue though I have though is just with the central idea of the lack of agency that comes with this. That the fact that you're outsourcing something. Well, I've got two problems with it. That's that and the surveillance aspect. I'll deal with them in turn. So, the idea that you would wear a wristband to detect your emotions and then go back and trawl through the data and ask that AI to tell you why you've fallen out with a friend just seems to me like the fastest way to a lack of self-awareness you could possibly get to. Like, it would be breeding some of the most shallow, boring people on the planet if this is adopted at scale, I think.
But what if it prompted someone to reflect on, like, what if it actually, I'm just trying to think of a good use, what if it prompted you to think about it, said, you lost your stuff, like, I can show you when you did, and then you lost a friendship.
Maybe I'm being too cynical. Maybe this is like, one of your good friends saying, hey, you overreacted at that point. But I just think, like, outsourcing it to a machine. I mean, really, is that the best way to do this? And secondly, the other thing that you touched on, Kate, I mean, just the surveillance aspect of this. I mean, the idea that, so I've got a team of about 100 people, and the idea that I would say, hey, everyone, wear a wristband, and that way we're gonna improve productivity and make everyone feel good. I mean, it's the most creepy thing in the world. There is no universe where that would happen. So I just have
a gummy on the way in, and everything's going to be good. And we can get you.
That's also not our strategy, just for the record. Yeah. But anyway, it's troubling. It's troubling. Look, I'm sure there are some good applications of this in limited settings.
So
and
Health Engine's not going to branch out into Heart Engine anytime soon.
No, and that's not to say that we're not using AI in lots of ways. We are. We're really leaning into it, and Mark touched on some of the things that we're working on too. But anyway, this is a whole other ball.
Come on, Mark, defend this startup for us. Why is this great?
Oh, my first point was going to be it reminds me very much of a Black Mirror episode where every interaction you have with other people, you've got to swipe up or down to give them ratings, and the poor girl, I think it was. I forget her last name and stuff. Oh, the actress, but she couldn't travel because her ratings were too low. That social kind of scoring thing. I do see that it comes from a good place, just given the pedigree of the founder, and that's something that is very important when we get lost by the features of the tech. It's like, what is the pedigree of the founder? And it could be good or bad. There was an AI device, a wearable as well, called the Rabbit, and that was. Unfortunately, it's got a very similar name to an adult's toy, but the Rabbit in this case was a wearable that you could actually, well, not a wearable, you could just use it like a Star Trek type device, take pictures and talk to it and get it to give you info. It was slow. It wasn't delivering on the promises. But the worst thing was that the founder didn't come from a good place. They came from abandoning projects and leaving with millions in the blockchain space, and was found out and outcast a little bit for that. But, it reminds me as well as of the scanning your eyeball. So Sam Altman wants everyone to, like, he's got OpenAI on the one side, but on the other side, he's part of this other company called WorldCoin, and they want to prove that you're human by scanning your eyeball, and it smells like data collection 2.0. In the new age.
Yeah.
They might make it sound like it's a positive thing, but we've got less scary ways of proving ourselves. I mean, we're looking, and we'll dive into it, but we're looking at improved ways of digital services, here in Australia from what we're learning about overseas. The positive side, if there is any kind of thing with this, the EU has their AI Act, And as part of my raging ADD, I read a lot about AI stuff as well. So we'll have to probably talk offline there, Kate, on stuff like this. But the EU AI Act that is out there, one of the biggest complaints about it, and I do see this, is that they were banning things like getting the AI to, if it's on a call like this, look at your emotions. They don't want it to do that kind of stuff. And the argument against was that, well, for us to be able to properly interact, we look at and we judge emotions. To remove that and only have things as text is missing a whole lot of things that could be useful for the AI, maybe even in that first case, if it was trained well enough to understand and react to emotions. And I don't use character AI. I have heard about it, second most popular AI tool out there, but it's not my category of usage. But I could imagine if it had guardrails in there that it could tell that there's troubling, in terms of the emotion, maybe that's a good thing. But it's a fine line between what's good and what's bad, what lines are crossed. 100 employees wearing some new bracelet and stuff and being able to, be tracked. My goodness, like, I think it's we're not at that stage yet as a culture and as a society yet. I don't know what our forebears will look like in 100 years, where they're like, oh yeah, we love this kind of stuff. I can't believe our ancestors didn't do it. So on the fence about extreme things like that, basically.
Yeah. Well, look, we're about halfway through the show, and this has been a pretty typical Burning Platforms, where we rail against technology and we think critically, we poke holes and we shake our heads. But Dan is going to break out of character now and talk about the new essay from the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei. It's probably fair to say Anthropic's been the least shitty of the LL players and has
Not
been raising concerns about the impact of AI in a way that wasn't totally self-serving. But according to the CEO now, things are okay, Dan.
Yeah, so I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Lizzie is on holidays and lean into my whole tech bro persona here. And
well, it could be a bro-off in a minute. Let's go.
Yeah, you're amongst friends, Mark. It's good to actually have the balance slightly more in my favour for once. But anyway, so yes, as you said, Dario Amodei, a bit of background on him. So he was one of the principal scientists at OpenAI alongside his sister Daniela. I think he joined the company back in 2016. But him and his sister left in 2021 over concerns about safety. And they're not the only ones who have done that, but I think they were the first. And they went and founded Anthropic, which is a public benefit corporation, which I think most people probably know. It's still a for-profit company, but it's a company that legally has to also consider its wider societal environmental impact and the like. So it's I guess it's earned a reputation as being one of the AI companies that genuinely cares about safety. And by all accounts, they seem to, right? But as a result of this, the Amodei has basically earned a reputation as sort of being one of the leading voices, if you like, of the AI doomers and predicting all of the worst things that could happen with AI, while at the same time sort of setting up this company and trying to advance it in the right direction, trying to advance it with so-called aligned AI, which I think most people would know, but, that's AI that is effectively aligned with human progress and ethical values and not going off down the dark paths that this potentially could. So anyway, yes, earlier this month, Dario published this very, very long essay called Machines of Loving Grace, which, you can all go and Google and read. And it was kind of a reversal of that. It was talking about all of the benefits of AI and what it could do for humanity. So look, I want to take advantage of Lizzie being away by sort of talking about this and going through what some of the things.
But Kate is here, though.
I feel an obligation to represent Lizzie.
Absolutely,
right? So
you can absolutely
you're your own woman, but you go hard.
Yeah, tread carefully, Dan.
Yeah. Look, I'm looking forward to it. I have no doubt. I'm sure Peter will weigh in as well. It's nothing I'm not used to. Anyway, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. So we'll move on. But the essay broke things down into 5 potential benefits that powerful AI could deliver. And by this, Amodei describes powerful AI, I guess in a similar way to what a lot of people refer to as AGI, artificial general intelligence. And that is effectively an AI which has Nobel Prize-winning intelligence across, most fields of human endeavour. And he thinks that this kind of tech, this kind of capability is coming as early as 2026, so a couple of years away. And he breaks it down to 5 potential benefits. So I won't go into a huge amount of detail around these, but He talks about the benefits of biological and physical health, neuroscience and mental health, economic development and poverty, peace and governance, and work and meaning. And look, what I like about his essay is that he doesn't talk about AI as some magical technology which is going to go and solve everything. He simply talks about it as an acceleration of what technology can do and its ability to effectively speed up human development. So a good example of this is he talks about CRISPR, the gene editing technology. So that was first discovered in the 1980s, but the ability to apply it took another 25 years. And in his view, and it's a pretty compelling argument, if you stick an LLM onto that technology, then you're probably going to get there a hell of a lot faster than what humans actually did. And that sounds like a pretty compelling thing to me to want to bring into reality. So I guess I was swayed by that argument. The downside, though, just one quick burning platforms downside, and then I'll let others get a word in. The thing that I found missing from the essay was a lack of acknowledgement that technological leaps of the kind that he is describing typically come with a huge amount of social disruption. And, we saw this with the printing press and, the witch hunts that followed from the misinformation or disinformation that came from that. You saw this with the Luddites, banging machinery, with cause, by the way, because they were losing their jobs and they weren't being considered. And, we've seen this more recently with the internet and the current political polarization, which I think that's had a huge amount to do with. And I worry that the one thing that all of these people that live in Silicon Valley do, which is a pretty strange place, pretty shielded from the rest of the world, is they miss the point that 95 or 99% of the world have to deal with the downsides of this, and San Francisco is actually not, a typical city, global city. So anyway, I quite like the essay. I would encourage everyone to go and read it, and you can all tell me why I'm wrong.
I would make the point, though, if part of the thesis is the AI is going to be able to do whatever a Nobel Prize winner does, the Nobel Prize in economics has just gone to Acemoglu and Johnson, who are saying that the secret is not to have AI making the decisions, but have it in the hands of humans. So if it does that, it might unplug itself, but maybe. Kate.
Wouldn't that be amazing if we get AGI and it decides actually AI was a terrible idea and just pulls the plug on the whole lot? I think that would be the smart thing to do, I think. I don't want to be a different kind of AI doomer, but I will have a different take than Lizzie because she's the human rights lawyer, and this is where my PhD in gender studies will come into play, right? Is that what's missing from this is the social and political context of how the world is, which you kind of touched on a bit there, Dan. San Francisco and Silicon Valley is such a limited part of the world and the world view, and they've got a very cloistered view of what the benefits will be. You look at the development, say, of RNA vaccines and how AI contributed to that advancement. But you look at during the COVID pandemic, the actual distribution of who in the world got those vaccines and the best quality ones in a timely manner, and the same economic inequalities that we see throughout the world were existent there. So my thesis is that even if we were to get this technology, we're going to see the exact same replication of the same inequalities that we've seen between the Silicon Valley tech bros and the global south. OpenAI has openly admitted to using, Kenyan workers, paying them $2 a day to do the kind of data cleanup in order to build their product. There's a huge amount of unpaid and underpaid workers from the global south and from East Asia contributing to these AI products. There's a huge environmental impact from the development of these AI products, and they're only going to be exacerbated by this increase in scale of whatever this fantastical, powerful AI is. Silicon Valley is doing almost nothing to address those problems. They're just full steam ahead and saying, well, once we solve climate change with this fantastical AI, all of our problems will be solved. But they won't be. The Silicon Valley tech bros problems will be solved, but the people who are living in Kenya and the people who are living in Taiwan and the people who are probably maybe even living in Australia will be even worse off from this kind of, trading of one person's value over another. And I would like to think that it can solve all of those problems. I think that's a pretty common view, but I just have a deep cynicism really about that we're going to see an equal distribution of these benefits, and that in fact we won't end up just exploiting the labour of others as we have done already for generations.
What do you really think?
Yeah, I know, right?
Hey, Mark, a quick take, because I do want to spend some time talking about your work, and as always, I've lost control of the clock. But
no, this is good. It's super interesting, and really great discussions. I could be here for longer. But definitely there's the disruption angle, as you mentioned, the distribution of benefits, as you were just talking about there, Kate. I was just thinking that it could actually exacerbate the inequalities that we already have, actually fast track those. So what I would love to see is that the way that you can quell that fire is by having more money and more purposeful support for companies and startups in the AI space and big organizations that are doing the opposite, that are doing stuff to actually, the reason why we have these inequalities in the first place is because there's a growing divide in terms of various things economically, lower wages, not enough earning power and cost of living going up. If we could tackle that with these beautiful, powerful tools, maybe we won't have those reasons that we have later on. And it's a big utopian kind of vision, but I do feel like we have to start from somewhere. And if we just continue down the path that we're doing, we are definitely going to fast track our way to that massive inequality where maybe it's just one person, or let alone one AI that owns like 90% of the wealth in the world and stuff. So it could be crazy, but I think what actions we take now will lay the groundwork and foundations for a better kind of future. Otherwise, we'll be like in June, where they had what they call the Butlerian jihad and took out all computers, AI, and everything. And I don't want to see that.
Kate's not into science fiction either, so she wouldn't be able to respond to that. So. Sorry, you're the butt of the jokes tonight. It's good. So Mark, extend that optimistic take into your world of Web3 and pitch us tell us why it's excited you and attracted you and where you see its capacity for good. And then we might look at the upcoming election and what that's going to do to the way these different bits of technology are rolling out.
Sure, would love to. And I've gone on a bit of a journey from being a massive skeptic of the space and seeing the only thing that I saw back in 2016, 17 was Bitcoin, and why are people buying this monopoly money thing and speculating on it and making it go higher. And I was working in capital markets. I was working on a trading desk as a macroeconomic researcher, seeing the world and the real things happening and seeing something that's not really adding value to society and being very skeptical. But the thing is, thanks to the hype and the growth of that space, sometimes you don't get, these hype cycles that happen in bubbles, whether it's .com, whether it's AI, whether it's blockchain that we've had recently. They sound bad, but they're also kind of necessary because folks like me would not have been involved as an early bird or a believer in just the culture of the space, just being a very pragmatic person myself, until seeing a lot of the hype and money that comes with that. And yes, there is wastage, but then we use a lot of the wasted tech and we build further upon that. There's something called like dark technology, where a lot of the wastage of the internet first.com kind of bubble was actually used to build upon further, and the mistakes that were made there. So the way that I see it, when I first came into this space, it was on the belief that, wow, blockchain tech, smart contracts is what they call it, is very akin to things like automation. And coming from a world of data and technology, seeing how we could make things more efficient was really the key. But then you come into this space, there's also a massive culture because people think they're going to get rich quick. And it makes sense that people would look at this because there's not much going on. What, you get 8% returns on a little stock and you could potentially get 1,000% return over here. Of course, you're going to punch your card and buy a lottery ticket. And it was so open and non-regulated, and we're starting to see that change. But it masks a lot of the noise. Sorry, all of that is noise that masks a real powerful thing that I think is there, which is this new way of keeping records. We had the Renaissance, where the Medicis hundreds of years ago pioneered the use of the double entry bookkeeping and the ledger. And now we have a way to do that in an even more decentralized way, to take away the power from just centralized. Like, if it's only a few places that have that record, they can get easily hacked. If it's distributed further, it has a protection there. And it's some of these greater benefits of things that blockchain can do that I think is really powerful. Like, I'll give you an example before we get into it, but the Australian government tested a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, and they called for different use cases from the banks, from technology companies and startups like myself. And we put something together which is very hard to do in the real world, which is escrows. And so builders in construction don't do escrows unless the job's hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. So little jobs don't get looked at. And then there's 30 days they do work, 30 days to get paid, 60 days they don't even know at minimum if the other side has money or not. They're not protected. But with blockchain, it's very easy to put escrows on there. And of course, there's like the things to make blockchain easy to use. And that is being done more and more, to the point where people won't even know that underneath they're paying their tenant, they're paying their landlord and they're the tenant. I will still pay in Aussie dollars. They'll still receive Aussie dollars. But the rails may be better because they're on blockchain and more programmable and cheaper. So we won't even realize the benefits. Just like we don't care how our phone like works and stuff. We just know it does the things that it does. So I think that there's a lot of power in this space. But there's still a lot of noise and misuse, unfortunately.
And tell me, what are I don't want to use, I did use the word. What are the ideas and the philosophies behind it? Like, so what is the mindset of the sector? Because as you know, the stereotype is libertarian, like a world without rules, except the ones that are on the blockchain.
It's really funny, right? Because a lot of people come into this space because they feel very strongly about that. And over time, as more pragmatic people come in and traditional entities like banks come in, the original people will complain, it's like not the space that I came into it for. And that's just how it works, unfortunately, because the way the world works in the data space is that you try to break things apart as much as you can, and then you piece it back together to make it work. And same thing with the concept of decentralization, which is one of the key concepts, right? That if it's better to have things distributed rather than having it all in the one space, and it's harder to hack. And blockchains have been hacked from social reasons, from people being weak in terms of how they keep passwords or weak in terms of who they bring in as developers, rather than the blockchain itself being hacked. There's been very few of those. But just going back.
Can I jump in just before we move on? Because I think this is one of the key areas where the whole reputation of blockchain technology went off the rails. So we had a circumstance where the idea of a decentralized ledger and the democratizing nature of that, I still maintain is hugely compelling, because the promise
Dad's
of that
got shares. You got coin.
Yes. Full disclosure, I do own some cryptocurrencies. That's honestly not why I'm saying this, though. But the point is that I think that not relying on an all-powerful central institution in order to transmit digital goods or even offline goods, but with not relying on a big centralized institution, has a democratizing benefit. The problem, though, is that got hijacked by the libertarians and their distrust of government and the whole thing about trying to break down anything that's going to control what they do. So it earned this reputation correctly, because so many of these tech bros, sort of libertarian tech bros, went down this very strange path. But it does feel like the pendulum's swinging back a little bit now. Mark, tell me if you agree with this. It feels like now that we're actually starting to get some practical applications of this, such as, the Australian government actually issuing this and putting the power more in the hands of the people that are using it, and a digital identification system whereby Australians can have full control over who has access to their data and who doesn't, and not rely on the central government to do it. I mean, this feels like a really substantial and positive development of technology, not the other way around. But I don't know. Am I as usual? Am I being too optimistic?
No. You're precisely right there, because it was all of these things that have happened in the past, the negatives in terms of, money being wasted in the space, unfortunately people losing money, and the crypto bro kind of culture, the tech bro culture, just moved over to crypto. Now we're all in AI, so it's okay. But the concept is, so a phrase that I love, right? And maybe people don't like this, especially the really true believers in the space. I say that you decentralize until it hurts, so as much as possible, but you centralize until it works. Now, fortunately, a lot of companies have realized that, yeah, they can't just make it fully decentralized, because just like movements like Occupy Wall Street, without leadership and direction, it's not going anywhere. And the centralization part either means that you make it work and link into traditional entities, or you add in the guardrails that you were so rallying against, such as being able to centralize some of the control in certain ways. Sure, you could have elements of your application, such as how the data is distributed, decentralized, but it doesn't mean everything has to be decentralized. It's a spectrum, and there's always going to be arguments, but my belief is that end customers will not care. As much as you care about the tech, oh, it's got the latest processor, it's got the latest blockchain, this blockchain's faster and whatnot. What are you doing for society? How are you helping others? And is it easy enough to use? The last part has been one of the hardest things, with the ways that you have to remember your 12 key words for your password, just in case it ever gets lost, because you can't just call up someone and go, hey, I forgot my password to my MetaMask wallet. No, you have to have written down, and people were going to extreme lengths, such as recording it on a tree and hiding it somewhere, or like putting it in the permafrost in the Alaskan tundra or something like that. Not useful and usable by the mainstream, but nice and clever, and it makes for a good story. But you're absolutely right that the benefits, we're going to start seeing it as institutions start using this and the banks start coming back into the space again. And a great example there, like Victor Dominello, who a lot of us follow on LinkedIn, who is all for the digital age, he is helping Services Australia in his capacity as a consultant. And what they did great with Services New South Wales, to help them look at a POC, a proof of concept, for how could a digital ID be blockchain, and not just that, but using something I really love, which is blockchain, but with selective disclosure. So there's other tech called zero knowledge proofs, which we won't get into the details of, but it's a way to prove things without sharing data. So that's what Services Australia is looking at for the digital ID. I think it's a wonderful example of what blockchain could do positively.
Kate, would this be on your very short list of things you like?
Cryptocurrency is a scam, but I am a big fan of Web3 and decentralized. And the reason why I think crypto is a scam is, I think, probably evident by the number of people who've lost huge amounts of money and the number of scams running on digital platforms. I don't know if that is we can attribute that to blockchain. I think we can attribute that to new technologies. There's going to be people who are trying to take advantage of other people, and when there are no protections in place, that's what's going to happen. But I think blockchain itself as a technology, anything that moves us away from the data extractive business models that we've seen on Web 2, I think is a good thing. We really have seen that wealth inequality that we spoke about before has really been facilitated. I mean, even the huge growth in generative AI has been facilitated by these extractive data business models, and it is not benefiting the right people. Pete, you're welcome to jump in here with your gripes about Books 3 and other thefts, other copyright infringements. But
Book 3 was the only thing that read my book, so I've got to dine out on it. Okay?
Exactly. Well, you've got at least one reader, right? Even if it is AI. But, I think anything that disrupts that platform economy, I think, is a good thing. And all of the protective benefits of having more secure ways to interact digitally is really critically important. I think digital ID, and this is probably be a point where I disagree with Lizzie a little bit, I think has huge benefits. And look, and I don't think Lizzie's against digital ID if it's done well. And I think we would be aligned in there. We need to have the right privacy and security things in place. But I actually think blockchain's a really exciting technology. But I also think that point that you made, Mark, about the accessibility is really, really important. I was at a session earlier today on digital inclusion and the idea of the internet as an essential service. I think there are some really big challenges, like there are already still challenges in making sure that everyone has access to just the NBN. There is a bit of a technical barrier with working with decentralized tech and working with blockchain that I think makes it tricky. But like some of those things that you talked about, like in terms of making the user interface the same, so that when you access your digital ID from your device, that it's the same experience, I think can get around that. But I think it is just something to kind of keep an eye on in terms of we still need to be thinking about, will everybody have fair access to this tech? Will everybody be getting the benefits, or will it just be groups of some people getting the benefits?
It's still new tech though, right? Like this is the thing. I think that a lot of the complaints, legitimate complaints, by the way, I'm not dismissing your point in any way, but a lot of the complaints that have come with the accessibility of blockchain are to do with the fact that it's just so damn new tech, such damn new technology. And you see this all the time. And look at the computer interface from the 80s compared to the interface now. Well, the interface now is rapidly becoming just a chatbot that you engage with. But like it improves over time. And I think we'll see that with this technology too. I will just push back against, I have to, right? This is my role. The whole point of cryptocurrencies being a scam, I absolutely accept that there are many people that have been scammed by it, and that's a big problem, no doubt about it. But the idea of this can get quite philosophical, so just bear with me for 2 seconds. I promise I'll bring it back. But money has value. The Australian dollar has value because we all agree that it does. It's really the same concept when it comes to cryptocurrencies, and the difference is now that the application of them can be that you can trade in digital goods. So if you take ETH, for example, the ability to buy and sell digital goods and trade digital goods in a purely digital environment is only made possible by blockchain technology, and specifically in most cases by ETH. So it seems to me that there is actually practical applications of this which are going to become more and more prominent over time. And they're effectively a currency, but they're a currency without a central government. I actually quite like that. I don't think that makes me a libertarian, but I quite like that as a concept because I think it's got potential.
Separation.
I think it might make you a little bit of a libertarian.
Yeah,
I promise I'm not. So, anyway, go on.
So speaking of leadership, though, so Mark, how important is this upcoming US election for the paths that this goes on? Not so much Trump, but JD Vance is being cast as the tech candidate. Elon Musk, God knows what he's expecting as a trade-off. We know from some of the analysis of his thinking, he sees the future of America not as a democracy, but as a corporation that's driven by technology. How are you looking at it? And does your part of the tech world have a pony in the race?
It's interesting. The future CEO of the United States, Elon, maybe we're heading down that path. But overall, the way I see it is that if you think about it as going back to some of the ethos and the rules here, and I'm adding AI into this because the way I see it, blockchain, AI, even data analytics, data science, and that even quantum, which we're not seeing much of yet, but it is coming, and there's some great things happening in Australia. But these are all tech tools, and it's how do you mix these things together? And one part, very simple to think about, is to think about blockchain as being a great way to have rules that are put in place that you cannot break, for example, if it's in the smart contract. So imagine, and people have gotten in trouble for this, selling a security to a retail investor that is not allowed for retail investors. It's only allowed for wholesale. In the current world, we have rules and laws and enforcement after the fact. But with blockchain, you could have some things where it's in the rules that unless the person's whitelisted as a wholesale investor, you'd never get to actually try to break the law. The smart contract won't let you. So blockchain for rules, and then AI as the smarts to find the gaps and see if we are abiding by or reminding us of or making sure that we're doing the right things there. So I can see these things being quite powerful in terms of not just running companies and providing goods and services, but even running parts of a country and government if it's done in the right way. And obviously different cultures, different strokes for different folks. Now, how the crypto space kind of leans into this, because there's a lot of money in the space. You see things like Coinbase, for example, which is led by Brian Armstrong. They're an American large crypto platform and exchange. Rivals Binance as like one of the two biggest in the world. And despite all of the pushback against crypto in the last couple of years in the US, they've created a movement called Stand with Crypto. And it's a bit of a political movement to help any groups around and advocates of people or groups and associations around the world try to help, educate their governments on the power of crypto. So by joining us all together, there's even been a pact, which I don't quite understand in terms of the US politics, how that works. I don't know if we've got similar stuff
They
here
can
in
raise
Australia.
they just have a right to raise lots of money and throw it to influence elections.
Yeah. So there's been a crypto one actually created in
with real money or crypto?
With probably crypto, but we've got these things where it's actually tied back to real value, stable coins, which is growing in Australia. We never really had stable coins in Australia. They were always denominated in the US dollars. We are seeing more companies trying to create things, and ex-bankers as well, a couple of ex-NAB folks, as well as others that have been in the space for a while, creating an Aussie dollar stable coin. So it's like you're spending Aussie dollars. It's just you've got more access to the digital world. But we're seeing a group of folks with money, wherever it's from, basically backing both sides, right? So it's not just like one side or the other, but they're providing money to look at both sides. And there was a post by one of the people that's in that space, Amanda Wick, shout outs to her over in the US, former prosecutor, federal prosecutor, turned into crypto advocate. And she highlighted that one of the candidates in some of the smaller parts of the federation over there was arguing against the other candidate for using crypto. And it's like, but you're being backed by crypto. So it's like the pot calling the kettle black. Crypto is about transparency, right? And we just have to stand by this kind of stuff. But it is a bit of a political kind of issue. Going back to it, Trump saying that I'm going to support crypto, and then
I think 1 in 7 Americans have crypto. I think I read somewhere, so it could really.
It's a big number.
Yeah.
And then the Democrats coming back after a while and finally
we
saying,
like crypto
yeah,
too.
They'll support it. Yeah, exactly. So look, for me, it's all promises until we actually see something happen and the tides change over there. For whoever gets in, they're saying they're positive on crypto. Let's see what happens post-November if they actually do something in that space. Because
does the crypto support lead in any meaningful way to support for the broader Web3 and blockchain project, though?
I do feel like it does. If it goes through, if it follows through, and they actually do provide that support, and we see, because companies were leaving the US because of the really strict rules, and it felt like it's just railing against crypto anything. And if that is now more supportive and companies go back to the largest economic opportunity, or one of the largest economic opportunities, Australia is like, what, 1/12 the size? If we were as big as the States, we wouldn't be seen as just a proof of concept type country for a lot of our tech, So
I think there is a slightly, or perhaps majorly more cynical reason why this has become a dominant feature of the US campaign, though, and that is because we talked about this a few weeks ago. Donald Trump is effectively trying to court young male voters, and they disproportionately hold cryptocurrencies. And I think was gaining some traction, which is why the Harris campaign has also since jumped on it, probably later than they should. I do take your point, though, Mark. I think that I think there is potential here, and hopefully, even though it was probably cynical reasons that the US election started to focus on this, I hope that it does lead to a little bit more focus on the potential of the underlying technology and where this can go. But I guess time will tell.
Agreed. I'm just waiting and seeing. It's not affecting us builders in Australia. We're still focusing on our real world projects, trying to actually solve things in terms of improving finance rather than overhauling it completely. It doesn't affect us too much here, unless, of course, you've got companies where they're relying on a lot of support in the US. But I don't know many Aussie companies that are solely tied to that. So I don't think it's going to affect us too much. It would be positive if it does go through and we see follow up that there is a lot more support and opening up, like you see in Asia, like you see maybe in bits of Europe and stuff. But until then, I think we just keep building as is.
They're listening and they're out to get you. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for sharing some of your insights with us. You are part of a really interesting network, and it struck me that there's so much expertise around people like you that are working on it. We should bring you into our discussions where we shake our heads about the world and think about better ways of regulating tech a bit more. I think my main takeout is that, there is a crossover between particularly those of us that care about data security and don't like the current model of platforms and different ways of doing it. Whether or not we put our hands in our pocket like Dan and sort of dare to dream on crypto is probably another matter. But thanks a lot. Great discussion. Kate, thanks for being part of us in between the ins and outs. And Dan, a pleasure as always. So we'll be back in a fortnight for another episode. Thanks guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you've been listening to Burning Platforms. It was recorded on October 29 and produced on Naarm land by Rebecca Cannell. Talk again soon.